My guest today is a Cape Town-based writer and journalist who is moved by stories that feature strong, interesting, and independent women. She's also a lover of animals and the outdoors and uses her writing to merge these passions in an exploration of the interconnectedness of all living things. Ms. Haw has just released her debut work of historical fiction, The Invincible Miss Cust, and she joins me now to chat about the book and her writing process. Welcome, Penny.
Thanks, Sam. Thank you. It's lovely to be here, Sam. Thank you.
So I gave away the name of the title. That's all I gave away. But give us an elevator pitch. What is The Invincible Miss Cust all about?
The Invincible Miss Cust is historical fiction based on the true life of Aleen Cust, who was an English aristocrat who overcame a myriad of obstacles in the late 1800s and early 1900s to become Britain and Ireland's first woman veterinary surgeon.
It's a work of historical fiction, Penny, but how on earth did you come upon this story and what made you pursue it?
Well, Sam, I had recently released my first contemporary fiction called The Wilderness Between Us, and I was looking to write another story about an interesting woman and explore the idea of animals and the outdoors and what have you. And as a child, I'd always imagined becoming a vet. I grew up on a dairy farm in KwaZulu-Natal, and I fantasized about being a vet. And I thought about setting my next book in a veterinary practice. And I thought about a rural practice with a woman veterinary surgeon. So I was just starting to explore the idea. And I decided to look up and see when women first became veterinary surgeons. And Aleen Cust's name came up very quickly. And I started to read her story, and I was captivated. From that moment, it was the most extraordinary story. I couldn't believe that I'd never heard of her before. And the more I researched, the more intrigued I became. And when I discovered that nobody else had written historical fiction based on her life, I couldn't resist doing it. I mean, there was one small biography that is written by a woman veterinary surgeon. It was published in 1990 in the UK. But it's a record primarily of Aleen's fight with the professional body, which was very useful as source material. But there was so much more to the story that I couldn't resist writing it. It just seemed like the story I'd been waiting all my life to write.
Well, we are going to get stuck into that, especially my favorite parts of the story. But the way that the genesis of it almost sounds like, were you imagining a type of, J.M. Coetzee's Disgrace? There's a vet, there's a woman vet there. She's quite a strong character, and she's not the protagonist. But were you imagining a South African story?
I was imagining a South African story, as I say, in a rural setting, and I wanted to explore what kind of patriarchal obstacles that women would probably still experience as vets, maybe with big animals. So there was a sense of that. I was interested in how that would be. But I didn't get very far on that. As I say, Aleen's name came up and I just went down the rabbit hole.
And there's a lot of politics happening at the time. It's the suffragette movement. You draw in a lot of big names that were making, waves at the time and kind of paving the way for women like Aleen, who also paved the way. I want to chat about your writing style in this, because you obviously had to channel 19th, 20th century, English. Was that easy for you to tap into, very Bridgerton-esque in the writing style?
I loved it, actually. I mean, and I guess it was quite a bit of the reading material that I had to get into. Gives you a sense of where you're going. But I found it very easy. I think partly because I related so much to Aleen. So there was a sense of As I mentioned, she was an aristocratic, came from an aristocratic family with lots of brothers, and couldn't understand why she was treated so differently to the brothers. I'm also an only girl with brothers, and certainly I never had the same kind of discrimination that Aleen faced, but I could relate to that. But as far as the writing went, I fell into it quite easily. I think maybe the kind of reading I've done all my life, I loved it, actually.
So what is your chosen genre?
Well, actually, literary fiction, but I'm reading a lot of historical fiction now, as a matter of fact, as a matter of, because that's where I've gone. But literary fiction, really. I mean, I studied literature at university, so that's been my go-to. But yeah, I grew up in KwaZulu-Natal, a very English background with, I mean, not a lot of Afrikaans. So English and Zulu were our languages there. So probably, you know, my ancestors, my great grandparents were originally from the UK and that. But it did come easily to me. I loved it.
So let's take the reader and the listener. Let's bring them into what was happening politically at the time, particularly in England and Ireland, because that also plays a big role, is what, you know, the kind of tension between England and Ireland, starting with what happens with Aleen's father in the very beginning, is pulled through. In addition to the suffragette movement, there's a lot there. It's very rich. So against what backdrop is Aleen's story happening, unfolding?
So it was Victorian England. Aleen's father was a land agent in Tipperary. That's where she was born, in Ireland. He was a British land agent. So there was a lot of tension at that point between the English and the Irish. It hadn't become as violent as it became later, but there was a lot of antagonism between the English landowners and the Irish farmers. So Aleen was born into that environment. Obviously, she was young and didn't recognize quite how bad it was, even though, and I won't give any spoilers here about her father's death, but she left with her mother and her siblings at the age of 10 and went to England. But before she left Ireland, she'd already decided, before she was 10, that she wanted to become a veterinary surgeon. When she heard such a thing existed, she decided that was what she wanted to become. And although she came from a very privileged family, girls and women at that point were not educated way beyond a very basic education of languages and a bit of basic numbers.
Probably
and
needlework.
Beyond that, they were expected to, you know, they were given governesses who taught them how to do needlepoint and play the pianoforte. And what happened with Aleen, and I don't think this is a spoiler, is that her mother, possibly distracted by events in Ireland before they left, but also just because she felt that there weren't any suitable English governesses in Ireland, let Aleen stay in the classroom with her brothers, with the tutor. And of course, the tutor were giving the boys a much more advanced education than any girls would get. So that was an inadvertent advantage that Aleen got in her youth. But even so, at that point, women or girls were not expected to, they were not accepted at tertiary places of tertiary education. It was a time, as you mentioned, it was a time of suffragettes and what have you. There were some women that were fighting their way into universities. It was, as Aleen reached her teens, the Edinburgh Seven, who were the women who fought their way into university in Edinburgh to be trained as physicians, as doctors, were abused and had to undergo all sorts of atrocities to be educated, and certainly it was considered very demeaning that an aristocratic English woman would want to work. And that was essentially what Aleen was hoping to do. She wanted to train and she wanted to work. Queen Victoria was on the throne, and contrary to what we might hope of a woman monarch, she didn't support other women. She didn't support other women. Their their independence from men. So Aleen's mother was a woman of the bedchamber to Queen Victoria. So she worked in the court, and she was terribly ashamed about the idea of Aleen wanting to be this, to unsex herself, essentially. That's what they said, unsex herself and want to work. And the most appalling of all was that she wanted to work with beasts. I mean, what kind of lady are you?
It comes up a lot to castrate bulls, you know.
Yeah.
How dare any woman stoop to such a level? It's almost seen as ungodly. You know, it's obviously anti-society and how you behave as a lady, but also just it's almost like it goes against religion, you know. It is some very interesting commentary coming out of there, especially where we are now in, you know, the fourth, fifth wave of feminism. Her mother is someone that appears quite often as a very contentious, you know, character, and well, you know, someone. So you mentioned she worked in Queen Victoria's bedchambers, and so there was reason for her coming up against Aleen, but they had a really frigid and fraught mother-daughter relationship, which you dive into. So it was tough to find an excerpt, Penny, that did not give the reader any spoilers, but I found one, I think, and I'd love for you to read it on page 236, just to show the reader that kind of relationship and how, you know, Aleen, so throughout the book, she doesn't have any ill feeling. She just feels sad, I think. She has no ill feeling towards her family, but they really do come up against her throughout her life, throughout her career, in her endeavor to become educated and to become a vet, and the first, you know, female vet in England and Ireland. So if you can take it away, Penny, from where it was indicated.
Yeah. So this is the section where Aleen is already working as a vet. I have to give away that much.
No.
And she's in Ireland, and she goes to visit her mother, who she's heard has fallen ill. "Hello, Mama." She lifted a bony finger and pointed at a chair beside the bed. "Sit." I did. Charles hovered at the door. "Do you want me to stay, Mama?" he asked. She gave her head a little shake, and he left, closing the door quietly behind him. "So it takes news of my imminent death to bring you to me?" She might have diminished in size, but her voice was the same commanding one of my youth. "The doctor's pleased with you today, I hear." "What does he know?" Her eyes flicked up and down the length of my torso. "You're larger than I remember." I felt hot. Was my pregnancy showing? Surely it could not be. No, it was as ever simply my mother pointing out what she saw as my feminine flaws. "Of course," she continued, "you've always seemed large compared to dainty Ursula. She's looking well, is she not?" "Yes, she is, very well." "What brings you to London?" "You, of course. I was visiting Dorothy, and I'm not going to die, you know. Not now, anyway. So it was unnecessary for you to come, after ignoring us for so long." "Mama, I wrote. I sent cards every birthday and Christmas. I have let you know my every movement, made sure you know my exact whereabouts at all times. I do not want letters, birthday greetings, cheery Christmas cards. What do you want?" "You know what I want. I want you to stop embarrassing yourself. Us. Come home. Distinguish yourself as a Cust, like Charles has." I swallowed. "I am here now." "Yes, but now I'm tired. Come tomorrow. No, the following day. At the same time." "Can we not?" "No, we cannot." "I will see you in 2 days." She closed her eyes, and I left.
Thanks for that. Yeah, that's one of the more sad kind of storylines that follow for me throughout the book. Although there are many, and there are many kind of threads that you follow in this. And the one leans obviously heavily on nonfiction, because this is historical fiction. So I'm curious, in writing historical fiction, how did you separate that fact from fiction? Where did you draw the line? How much liberty do you take as a writer? These are obviously imagined scenes. Unless you have a diary of the character that you're channeling into, or a journal, you really have to read into a lot of what her interactions with her family members and people she knew were like. So what was your writing process in that instance?
There weren't any diaries. There are a number of copies of speeches that Aleen gave towards her latter life, when she was addressing primarily other women who were looking to study veterinary science. But there weren't any journals, and that was one of the reasons that I felt that I could write in Aleen's voice. I wouldn't have done that if there had been a lot of her own voice out there. So that was the first liberty I took, essentially, was that I wrote in the first person as if I was Aleen. But certainly I had to imagine the thoughts, the emotions, the conversations. But the reality is that the story had so much rich information about it. I mean, Aleen's friendships with, you mentioned earlier about prominent people, like her best friend, Dorothy Widdrington, who married Sir Edward Grey, who was Britain's longest serving foreign secretary. I mean, it was just amazing. And Aleen had a friendship with Edward throughout her life. So there were records of those friendships, the romance, which I won't go into now because otherwise it really will give everything about. There were several mentions in the information about Aleen that this romance happened, but the extent of it and how it happened, and how things went, because she was also engaged to the other person. That was a matter of fact.
There's a triangle to fill our listeners in. There's a bit of a triangle, towards the end of the book, and we'll leave it at that. But so there were mentionings of, in everything that you read in the articles, these people's names came up, and you kind of followed the dots.
Well, I knew what happened in Ireland with Willie Byrne. I knew that there'd been something there, and there was record of the fact that they were together, and I knew that she'd been engaged to Bertie. That was on record as well. And then I discovered that was a very short engagement, and then she went back to Ireland. So I kind of had to work in, so how did this happen, and I think that is the absolute beauty with historical fiction, is that you read these things and you go, okay, so this was this time, and what had happened here, and this was at the point where Queen Victoria had just died, so what might have happened, there were all these things that kind of came together and gave me an indication of what could have happened. But yes, it is fiction, the thoughts and what have you, and I think that is what makes writing historical fiction such a pleasure. And I loved writing this. I loved writing it because the true story is just extraordinary. I mean, and that was why in my author's notes I wanted to go into it quite deeply, to show people this is a lot of this is not made up. But obviously I don't have recordings of her conversations, and I don't have any love letters or anything like that.
But those juicy plot points, that was all Aleen.
It was all Aleen, and and it just lent itself to, which was one of the reasons why I'm still amazed that nobody has written her story previously. So, yeah.
Well,
and then
it left a gap for you, Penny.
It did. I was so lucky. I still feel fortunate. Yeah.
So let's.
And then sorry, carry on.
No, after you.
I was going to say that just the research, for example, the point where Aleen's mother gives in to her to go and work at the hospital in London, which I mean is I guess we're giving something else away there, but that was fact as well, that Florence Nightingale had made it acceptable for upper class English women to become nurses, because Florence Nightingale came from a family an esteemed English family, and so she paved the way there. So Aleen's mother was not very willing to do so, but she conceded that Aleen could go and work at the hospital. But that period was a very short period. And I wondered, when I was researching that, I thought, what could have happened that, that would allow her to leave the nursing profession, not lose face with her mother? Because, of course, her mother would go, you see, you're not up to it. You're not a working woman. So when I researched the era, there was a happy coincidence, which I won't talk about now, because I think you need to read the book to find out
and
how,
it's an
how
interesting
that came together.
one. Yeah, it is an interesting one, considering what women and feminists are fighting for today and what was happening at the time. So readers, tap into that. It is quite an interesting tidbit. Penny, I want to talk about how you weaved in your love of animals. So Aleen Cust obviously loved animals. She became a vet. She was the first female vet in Ireland and England. But she went also in line with wanting to please her mother, bred Pomeranians at the time when miniatures, well, the Queen Victoria, much like Queen Elizabeth, really loved corgis. Queen Victoria really loved Pomeranians. That was interesting for me to learn. And this was at a time when breeding miniatures was becoming very on trend. And Aleen also loved horses. So, and there's a lot of knowledge that comes in addition to sort of knowledge about cattle and all of that. So how much animal knowledge did you have going into this project, and how much did you have to kind of do some deep dive research into?
Well, I grew up as I said, on the dairy farm. I had certainly my father put us to work on the farm as kids, so I have a fairly good knowledge of calving and of horses, and I've always had dogs, always had cats, so I have a fairly good practical knowledge of basic animal husbandry, I guess. But I worked with a friend, a veterinary surgeon friend, who I in fact met in Cape Town when I finished university. He's an Irishman, and he had graduated from veterinary college, and he'd come to South Africa to have a bit of an adventure and find work here. And I met him back then. He wasn't here for a very long time. He went back to England, and he's practiced in England for most of his life. But he recently retired after having a number of veterinary practices. And he's a very passionate veterinary surgeon, regardless of being retired. And he's a member of the Royal College of Veterinary Surgeons. So he was a very useful friend, and Irish.
Yeah.
So I would create these scenes where Aleen would be working with the animals and what have you, and then I'd plot them out and write them, and then I would consult with him, and he was fabulously helpful. I mean, for every scene, whether Aleen had her arm in a cow or whether she was
or every jerk of the animal, he'd be able to corroborate. Yeah.
Exactly, and he would send me pages and pages of information. So I had to make it right. I had to be correct. I had to make sure that she was holding on the right part of the calf, and that if you tied a rope here, this would happen, and if you supported a horse this way, I found it really fascinating. But he really helped me, and I mean, obviously, what was interesting was that at the time that Aleen was undertaking all these procedures, there certainly there wasn't the equipment and the knowledge and the drugs, the medicine, and what have you that there is today. So we also had to do a lot of historical research into finding out what would she have used, what would have been available. And it helped a great deal that Richard, my friend, had access to resources, professional resources, so he could help me there. We could find out, that they would have been using this oil or that paraffin or whatever.
Yes,
So,
yes. Super
yeah.
interesting for me what she whips out of her bag from time to time. And
Yeah.
there's one instance where there's a stillborn, calf that the farmer in the scenario didn't know of, and she's got to kind of find a way somehow. She and this farmer, and she's stubborn and persistent in her endeavor. She refuses to call on the more senior vet at the time, and she births this calf. I'm right. I'm not muddling
Yes,
storylines.
yes.
And so you would have had to have gone, okay, in this instance, were a calf in utero been in this position, would this be appropriate? So yes, and you can see that it is accurately portrayed. You're not making up some fluff. So I do appreciate that as the reader.
I've had a few vets that have read it, and so far none of them have found anything that wouldn't happen. I mean, obviously there's always room for people doing things differently, but in fact, a vet who has retired to here in the Overberg phoned me and said to me, "No, you should have been a vet." I did say to him, "Well, I once dreamt of it, but I have to concede I had expert help here as well." But yeah.
So Penny, as well, I want to tap in a little bit to Dorothy. She's a lovely character. I really enjoy her as Aleen's best friend. Her love for nature and her very unique marriage. Do you, not on the marriage front, let's not go there, but in terms of her love for nature, do you relate to that?
Absolutely, yeah. She was an interesting person. I mean, in fact, my editor said when we were working through it, we were talking about how she might have been on the spectrum. Had she lived today, she would have been diagnosed as being on the spectrum because of aversion to touch and what have you. But she was a very interesting woman, and there's quite a lot written about her and Sir Edward Grey's marriage. That was all fact about their marriage.
So how was it in a biography that you read? I'm wondering, how would that have become public knowledge?
Yeah, I think he was a fascinating man. There've been a number of biographies written about him, but how that came to light, I'm not 100% certain. The term that she said she was a good country wife because she didn't like the busyness of London. So when he was working in London, she stayed in their little country cottage. I guess that it was kind of common knowledge that they lived platonic lives. That is what they lived.
It's really fascinating to me. It's fascinating that there also wasn't any pressure from anybody for them to have children, considering the context.
Exactly. I think that and maybe there was, but certainly that it was not. I mean, the fact that he was the heir to to the Falloden Hall and what have you would have expected that, but no. And I mean, if you do more research into him, he actually never had children. He did because he had other relationships after Aleen died, but
with women. Penny.
Yes.
Because I think that's women. An obvious question. If you have a platonic marriage, are one of the partners in the marriage gay? So that I think that's the conclusion I jumped to.
Yeah. No, he did have relationships with other women, and I recently read an article. It's in a European publication about a woman. She's no longer young, but a woman who claimed to be his illegitimate daughter from a different relationship. They were an interesting couple.
Really fascinating, and that's sort of an offset, really kind of subplot of the main thrust of the story, which towards the end, I was like, oh, okay, this is picking up like pace here. There again, no spoiler, no obvious spoilers, but there is some sauciness for people to look forward to. I would say in the latter third of the novel, might I put in a special request for more Willie Byrne. That man,
that
I was like, okay, I enjoyed spending a weekend with Mr. Byrne. I really did.
That's so interesting because I think we can say that Willie Byrne was the romantic interest, and they were poles apart. He was Irish, he was Catholic, she was Protestant,
That
she was
curl
English.
though, Penny. Did you make up that curl, or did he have a head of curly hair?
I might have seen a picture of Henry Cavill.
Ah, you see, much along those lines. Yes.
I thought, well, maybe if I put this in, then one day Henry Cavill will play the part of Willie Byrne in the movie.
I can see it. 100%.
But Sam, it's interesting that you talk about the steaminess. I found that quite difficult to write. I guess being relatively new to fiction, I was a journalist, a business writer primarily. So this is all stuff that I'm learning. But we joke because my husband said to me, "Oh, you could have made it so much steamier," and I thought, no, this is about as steamy as I'm willing to go. But what happened with the book? It's published by Source Books, who are a publisher based in Chicago in the US, and it was picked up by the Junior Library Guild, which is a fantastic boost for the book, because it means that it gets packaged for school libraries and community libraries. Obviously for the later grades, the older grades. But had it been steamier, it would never have been picked up. So
every pot has its lid, shall we say?
Exactly.
Well, I was gonna say, and I mean, there is room for sequels. I know that Miss Cust's journey comes to an end, but the Cust siblings are also interesting. Ursula, for one. I mean, so I'm not telling you what to do with your writing career, and I'm going to ask you what's next after this, but I did want to say, imagine taking on a Julia Quinn type scenario where you take on each of the Cust siblings, each of the surviving Cust siblings, and kind of expand on their stories. How interesting. Why did Charles behave the way that he did? Why was Ursula such a mommy's girl, that you just kind of want to shake? I enjoyed that aspect of it, the family dynamics and the sauciness. I'm all for the sauciness, Penny. Okay. I think I'm with your husband on that. But you are working. So we did gloss over, and you did mention that you're a journalist. So you're a business writer. Business Day, we can find your writing in Sunday Times, Financial Mail, Sunday Independent, The Weekender, but you have had some other works of fiction out. So let's discuss that before we discuss what you're moving on to next in this year.
Well, actually, I'm no longer working as a journalist. I am working full time now as an author.
Amazing,
so
nice.
So I've moved on to other things.
A dream come true, I'm sure. I mean, not that being a journalist isn't a dream, but
it's fabulous. I think, and in fact, someone asked me the other day, do you wish that you'd gone into fiction earlier? And I don't think so. I had such a wonderful life as a journalist, and I think working as a journalist prepared me for this, and I don't think I was ready to go into fiction. But I started working in fiction while I was still working full time as a business journalist, and I'd always imagined writing fiction at some point, and I guess I said it often because eventually my son and husband said, "Just do it already," tired of hearing me talk about it, and I realized that was pretty terrifying. When you know how to do something, you kind of, the unknown is quite scary. And I think you also, for me, fiction exposes you in some ways.
Mm.
Whereas, you know, journalism, you're always hiding behind someone else's story, I guess.
I have
So
to say, Penny, sorry to interrupt you, but
no,
in writing fiction and delving into creative writing, that's exactly, I can relate so much because I'm studying creative writing, and I've had lecturers say to me, but where is Sam in all of this? And I'm, as a journalist, I'm sure you know, like, I know Sam is not here anywhere to do with that story because I'm a journalist. The facts are the facts, and the journalist is a total third party. Why are you asking me where I am in this? So I can 100% relate to that fear of taking the leap. And yes, you're not writing about yourself. You're writing about, Aleen Cust, who was a very real character. But there is so much of Penny that goes into this.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's scary. I mean, but I can encourage you, because once you get over that, oh man, it is so much fun. It really is, you know. But yeah, it reveals something in you which is easy to avoid when you're writing other stuff. So the way I did it, Sam, was that I decided that I would write a children's book first, and I wrote in my children's book is based on a true story as well about a vervet monkey and my grandmother. And it was a story that I had grown up with. My grandmother was a great animal lover as well. In fact, I learned a lot about what I know about animals from her. And she told me this extraordinary story about her 17 years with a vervet monkey, who essentially adopted her and her other animals as his troop. And so I decided that I would write a children's book, for kind of 9 to 12-year-olds about this monkey. And that's what I did. So that was my gateway into fiction, if you will. And I had such fun doing it. I had such fun that I felt guilty doing it. I'd only do it after hours because
that.
I felt like I shouldn't be having so
this.
fun. Yeah.
I should be punishing myself with more business stories.
Stories that have an invoice attached to them, you know?
Hard relate on that, Penny. Yes.
Yeah. So that was once I did that, and I realized, wow, this is such fun. And it was, for me, as I say, you rediscover the playfulness of writing. And if you were anything like me, I mean, as a child, I made up all these stories in my head. I had this little radio play going on all the time, whether I was Penny the vet or Susan the lawyer, or whoever I was. There was a whole fantasy world there. And I feel like I've recovered that with the fiction. So it really is great fun, but it does take some letting go. You have to give yourself time. But I strongly encourage it, because man, it really is fun.
Well, it sounds it, and you're onto another project. So tell us what's next for Penny Haw.
So the Invincible Miss Cust was part of a 2-book deal with Source Books, and honestly, I've been so lucky. They're a woman-owned company. The company was established 30 years ago by a real publishing visionary, Dominique Raca, and she's built this very big company. It's one of the biggest independent publishers in the US now, and it's now partially owned by Penguin Random House, but still majority owned by this woman. But so a very much a women's company. And when they bought the manuscript of the Invincible Miss Cust, they made it part of it. When I have an agent in the US, and she helped me sell them a 2-book deal. So the second book is coming out in October, and it is also about an extraordinary woman whose story has gone somewhat under the radar. Her name is Bertha Benz, and she was the wife of Carl Benz, who is known as the father of the automobile. And Bertha Benz was essentially Carl's business partner throughout, and she's only recently has been recognized what a huge role she played in innovating with both the machine, but also as a businesswoman, as an entrepreneur who took risks and who, in many ways, pointed her husband in the right direction in many circumstances. So that book, it's called The Woman at the Wheel, and it's coming out at the beginning of October.
Wow, congratulations. And
thank you.
As a reader, I look forward to reading it. And so readers, listeners, get on top of the Invincible Miss Cust, and I will put listeners in touch with you, Penny, and your social media platforms and your website, so everybody knows where to find you and where to find your book. And I look forward to The Woman at the Wheel.
The Woman at the Wheel.
The Woman at the Wheel. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining me on TGE's Current Read.
Thank you so much, Sam. It's been wonderful. Thank you. Bye-bye.